Agreed. There's never been a free market or a government separate from money, essentially. We could say it has sort of happened, but it hasn't persisted over time historically.
Yep.
The book that I mentioned a lot that I don't know if you've read or not, it's called The Sovereign Individual. Mm-hmm. So yep. what we end up talking about then is the state has always monopolized money because it could effectively, mm-hmm. right? Money is the most important tool for humans. If you can control that tool, you can control people. And that's essentially what government's trying to do.
Totally agree.
So to argue, I think my counter argument to like a Graeber or an MMT perspective that we're the state, we can do whatever we want. My counter argument would be that we've never had money independent of state because the tech has never existed. And this gets into the actual calculus of violence, the logic of violence, which is something the Sovereign Individual explores in depth. And so an allegory here may have been like in the year 1500, or we'll say late 1400s, you probably wouldn't have bet against the church. You know, the church had been running the show for a long time. They had a stranglehold on knowledge, information, printing of books, wealth. They were running the show. And so to be part of that bureaucracy was the way to have power in the world effectively. But then, as we know, something seemingly harmless emerges, like a printing press, just a little piece of tech. Next thing you know, we've increased the rate of book production by thousands of percentage points, many orders of magnitude. Church loses its monopoly on knowledge and therefore starts its descent as the dominant institution in the world. And the book goes in depth how many technologies like gunpowder has changed the logic of violence. The stirrup on a horse, little
bicycle.
Little things that you wouldn't even think about. They actually change the way we can project power across space and time. So it changes the way we organize our institutions. And so Bitcoin, the theory there at least is that Bitcoin is so much more expensive to confiscate, so much more difficult to confiscate versus, gold or someone just taxing your bank account, which is very low cost to confiscate, that it's essentially changing this calculus of violence, pushing us away from a statist society towards, I guess you could call it an anarcho-capitalist society where vast, maybe not all exchanges would be purely voluntary. You'd still have violence and whatnot, but the cost benefit on violence collapses. So all of a sudden violence is a much less profitable enterprise. And we get into a world characterized by much more voluntary exchange. So kind of a long-winded counter argument there, but I just wanted to lay out the Bitcoiner position as I see it.
Well, so I think there's a couple of things I would say there. And again, I think this is probably where I've been greatly misunderstood along the way is typically when I do these podcasts or these shows, I do them as Brent Johnson of Santiago Capital, which is a wealth management firm and which makes investments on behalf of clients. Right. And my job in that role is not to be a moralist. My job is not to be, a social justice warrior. Yeah. My job is to make money, right? They don't hire me for my politics. God knows they don't hire me for my politics. They don't hire me for my social media. They don't hire me for my, personal beliefs. They hire me because they want me to figure out some way to get through the financial chaos or uncertainty that's to come. They have other sources to get their, religion or morals or social beliefs, right? They haven't sought me out for that. So there's a difference between what I would personally like to see and what I would personally do versus what I would do on behalf of clients. And I agree that the technology that has been developed with regard to Bitcoin, I don't know if it's revolutionary, but it has certainly, I guess that's probably the best way to say it. I actually don't think the technology is that advanced. It's a ledger. It's a digital ledger, and to me that is the simplicity is its beauty, right?
Yes, agreed.
So it's not like it's some super complicated thing that nobody in the world can understand. It's actually fairly simple to understand once you take the time to understand it. Now, maybe the cryptography around it and the ability to send that information quickly and effortlessly around the world immediately, that's kind of maybe that's the technological evolution, but the system itself is miraculously simple, right?
Yes.
And that's its beauty. And so I think that it has great potential and great power. And the fact that Bitcoin went to $60,000 from being a penny, 12 years ago, or a tenth of it? What did it start off as? A tenth of a penny or a hundredth of a penny? I don't remember.
Below a cent. Yeah, I think it was
below a penny, right?
4/10 of a cent, maybe.
Yeah, right. Okay, so that in and of itself shows that the market, not the state, but the real market, and this goes back to the Austrian school, right? The market is demanding an alternative to the state-sponsored form of money. And it's clear that there was great demand for this because it went from a penny to $60,000. Now, you can argue there's different reasons why it went that high, and some people would say it's the pure market at work, and other people will say it's a speculative mania. Other people will say it's manipulation, but the fact is that it went there, right? Yeah. And so, from that perspective, I think it shows two things. It shows that the private market can provide a solution. You don't have to have state-sponsored money. It can come from the market. But I think it also showed, I think it is starting to show, is maybe a better way to say it, that states don't like competition, right? And so I have been, I don't know, pilloried, is that the word? Pillar?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of a nice way to say it, for saying that governments would strike back. Yeah. And
against Bitcoin.
And against Bitcoin or against crypto, however you want to, digital assets, however you want to define that space. It's so funny. Sometimes I'll say crypto, sometimes I'll say Bitcoin. If I say Bitcoin, somebody will come back and they'll say, but that's not crypto. If I say crypto, they'll say, well, that's not Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I kind of use them interchangeably. Anyway, my point is only that this is my opinion, and I might be wrong in this, but my opinion is that many in the Bitcoin world, especially the Bitcoin maximalists. I think you've had some experience with the Bitcoin maximalists recently.
Plenty of experience with those guys.
I think that they have vastly overstated the ability to take on the state. And I am not saying that it's impossible for Bitcoin to win this battle. I will never say anything is impossible. But the idea that the governments are powerless and can't do anything about it and are helpless against the rise of Bitcoin, I think is just utter fantasy. Because they are very powerful. There is a lot of things they can do. And I think many people who think that this rise of Bitcoin is inevitable and fiat currencies are going to fall and they're all going to be at the mercy of Bitcoin, I don't think they've studied history. This is just typically not how it goes. And I don't think that they have an appreciation to the lengths of which governments will go to remain in power. I mean, wars are fought over these kinds of things. Really, really, really bad things happen when governments try to stay in power. I mean, we don't have time to go through all of them, and we could spend the next 20 hours talking about these things. It's absolutely horrible things that have happened as a result. And so the idea that, in my opinion, the governments are just going to sit by and let this happen without fighting back and without extracting some extreme amount of pain along the way, I think is just silly, for lack of a better word.
I think countermeasures, agreed completely. I think that's happening right now. Like there would be no talk of CBDCs if there wasn't Bitcoin. Clearly,
totally agree.
And they're mobilizing.
This is just one of the ways they're fighting back.
Yeah, and depending on how much of your or I guess what size tinfoil hat you want to put on. You could argue that there's a lot of other things going on that are in a direct response to the threat of Bitcoin. And so I guess I see that happening. I agree that's going to happen. I've long thought that that is going to be probably the most dystopian thing we see, is whatever the real state countermeasure to Bitcoin is.
Yeah, I agree.
Could be something like an IMF coin or whatever, one world currency type thing, which is, of biblical proportions bad. But I guess the bet for me on Bitcoin is that, or again, back to simplicity, it's just Gresham's law playing out at a geopolitical level. It's like they have to end up holding some of this thing. The longer it succeeds in the market, you're then playing this geopolitical game where you need to save some of the harder money and spend softer monies. So borrow and spend currencies. And over time, that dynamic just spirals out of control, where you see countries end up fighting over, hash rate and Bitcoin position and whatnot. But in the process of that, what's happening is the currency monopolies are basically being devitalized, so that, the more inflation you've created more demand for inflation resistant money. So individuals are adopting it, corporations are adopting it, ultimately states are adopting it. Well, then they're losing their power to confiscate wealth via inflation. And for the US, that was half the US revenue, at least in 2020. We had 4 trillion direct tax revenues. We printed 4 trillion. Yep. So that's a big blow to state power and state revenue.